Hello and welcome to this conversation today about teaching, technology, and trailblazing the way with innovation, and probably lots of other topics as well. We've got a special guest I'm going to introduce in a moment. I'm Jamie. I'm the Executive Chairman of C Learning, digital technology specialist, and we help people to transform their organizations using technology. I've got the privilege of working with some of the most innovative leaders globally who want to be positioned at the forefront of what they're doing. That's where we operate, at the edges. We're not mainstream. We're not for everyone. We tend to operate at the edges with people who are doing really innovative things with high impact. So that's an absolute joy for me and how I get to spend my days. But enough about me. I'd now like to introduce my co-presenter, if that's the right word. I don't know, co-discussion host, whatever you want to call yourself. Chris, introduce yourself, my friend.
Co-presenter, I love that. I'm Chris. I'm the product solution manager for C Learning. So basically anything to do with products or services that just make the people we deal with's lives easier and simpler. So yeah, just solutions to make things easier. So really excited to be on the call today and looking forward to it.
What a great way to describe what we do as well, solutions that just make things easier. I've long believed technology should just work and make your life better. And isn't that what we really want from technology? Maybe we'll dig into that a little bit with our special guest today, which is Sammy White. I am absolutely thrilled that you're joining us today, Sammy. Thanks so much for putting some time aside. Sammy works at the intersection of education, technology, and inclusion, and is passionate about all these things. I've known Sammy for quite a long time. She's absolutely amazing, doing some really innovative work. And she's currently the learning lead at Genio. Hope I pronounced that correctly. And I hope I got your title correct there, Sammy. But you're doing some amazing work with Genio, and maybe you can explain a little bit about that in the course of this conversation. I know that you are very, very passionate about equity and driving forward innovation in education for learners from all different backgrounds. You're obviously you're a very well-known figure in our world, of course. Tech Women 100 Award winner in 2023. And I remember when you won that as well. And I remember just how much competition there was. That was a big award. There was a lot of people involved in that from a lot of backgrounds. So a huge congratulations to you for achieving that extraordinary award. It really is amazing. It was a quite substantial award, and that's why I wanted to just mention it by way of introduction, because it is quite extraordinary. And credit to you for that. Absolutely amazing. And I just love the sort of blend of lived experience, technical insight, and if I can put it as educational empathy that you bring to what you do as well. I think you're an extraordinary figure in the education sector, Sammy, and wider in terms of how you support people and share as well. So absolutely thrilled that you're with us today, and welcome.
Thank you very much. That was a very lovely introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, I bigged you up, but perfectly justified. And we don't big people up lightly, but I think, and I could have said a lot more actually, but I thought we'd want to get into the discussion at this point. But you do inspirational work, and I've seen the way you work over a number of years. You're also an inspirational speaker, as I've mentioned to you before. I had the privilege to see you present at the EduFuturist Awards a couple of years ago. And there was a number of speakers that evening, and they were all, very good in the way that they would be. But I'd never seen you speak before, publicly or on stage, and you delivered what can only be described as a masterclass in a presentation. It was like watching one of the best TED Talks you've watched. And I remember being in the audience, just absolutely hanging on your every word. And I've mentioned it to so many people since, because I think it was an absolute masterclass in presenting, basically, and delivering an impactful talk that emotionally resonated with all of the people there. It was extraordinary to see. So you bring so much to what you do in so many different ways. And
I know you're interesting now, though, isn't there, on this?
No pressure.
This is just an informal chat. This is a conversation amongst friends about topics that we care about, basically. So we haven't got to worry about delivering a masterclass and a TED Talk today. This is a really relaxed conversation, and that's the whole point of it, really. And it's not sponsored by anybody either, I should say, by way of introduction. So we're not obligated to talk about any platforms or anybody. And I think that's the strength of these conversations. It's just an open, friendly, supportive conversation between friends about things we care about. And that's what we're going to dig into now. And we're going to take it in turns, me and Chris, with the discussion topic. So I'm going to kick off with the first one before I hand over to Chris. But and they're all very open-ended questions, and we'll see where the discussion goes. But from my point of view, given that I know you've done so much work around inclusivity, and I know it's something you're really passionate about, and I know it's a very broad term as well. But in terms of your own words and what it means to you when we think about inclusive edtech and inclusive education technology, what changes have you been part of that you're really proud of, and what work are you doing around that agenda, if I can call it that you're really proud of? And what do you think could make learning more accessible in the work that you do, Sammy?
Well, I think we hit on it in the introduction piece where, like Chris said, products should make life easier. That is the purpose of any product, whether it's technology or not. And we sort of have this dichotomy of assistive tech and normal tech. And actually, what's good for one person is probably good for everyone. And it's something that really struck with me when I was in the classroom, that actually if we just let people use laptops because it's easier, then we're probably going to get on a bit quicker with getting the learning done. And then it sort of evolved into, actually, do you know what, instead of writing me a 500-page document about what you've learned over the course of the year, why don't you do me a quick video? You know, I remember having a really challenging dance group of students, and they would literally rather be dancing on the tables and listening to me at any moment. And they were the sort of group that they ran in packs. You'd see them in the corridor and people would retreat because the pack were coming, and they were notoriously difficult little people. I nearly said something else then, but they were very difficult. And one day they walked in and one of the pack was missing. And I said, "Where is he?" And they said, "Oh, he got in trouble yesterday because he said something inappropriate. He's been excluded." I said, "Well, I haven't been told he's been excluded. He can come into my class and we'll work it out." He came in, we had a good chat, and he said, "Yours is the only class where you let us express ourselves differently. And I've got all these challenges and nobody's listening to me." And we then did a TikTok dance about angles in parallel lines, you know, as you do. And for me, what he needed was to express himself, not to sit down to write. Yes, he has to behave, and yes, you know, he has to follow the rules. But actually, in asking him to do a big long piece of writing or sit in silence for an exam in a mock situation isn't helpful for him. And being able to record a video of him dancing through what he'd learned made the difference to him. And that's the thing that I've always held on to, is what is it that makes the difference for everyone? And if we just let everyone do things in a more accessible way, we'll have a more successful outcome for everyone, rather than having this dichotomy of you have an additional need, so you get this set of tools and this suite of products. Actually, what if everyone had access and we just said, pick and choose? Pick and choose from this. Show me what you've learned in a different way. And, you know, it still baffles me that when you think about people who get a doctorate, you know, the way you get a doctorate is through a viva, where you discuss what you wrote. You don't get the doctorate from writing the PhD. You get it from discussing what you learned. So if it's good enough for a PhD, why is it not good enough for the kids in school?
Yeah, 100%. I was going to say there, some of us get them by not working for it at all, but just have it just on there.
No, a very worthy honorary doctorate.
Yeah.
Something different. But no, I think it you know, if you lay it out, you know, yes, they've done the work to write the PhD, but actually the award of it is through the discussion and talking about and being interviewed and interrogated about what you've learned and the impact it's had on you.
Yeah, 100%.
But we don't apply that lower down the chain of qualifications. It's preserved for the top tier.
Yeah, I love that as well, because straight away you started talking then about the empathy bit. I was talking by way of introducing you, and I mentioned your sort of the empathy you bring to your practice and what you do, and straight away you started talking there in a way that shows a very advanced sort of, if I can put it that way, a very advanced form of empathy around the people that are coming into the spaces that you operate in, and sort of differentiating your practice there to sort of really resonate with that individual who clearly was having a bad time elsewhere. A good friend of mine who's retired now, but a chap called Dr. Chris Davies, who was who knows about as much about pedagogy as anybody I've ever met on this planet, and his PhD was just a remarkable thing to read about teacher practice. When he was training teachers, he used to do this exercise where he'd get all the new trainee teachers round in a sort of horseshoe shape. And he'd come in and he'd start presenting about the topic that they wanted to explore, but he'd have a can of pop in his hand and he'd just randomly throw it at the people. You know where this is going, Sammy, right?
Yeah.
And he'd get them to throw it back, and he'd throw it back at another teacher who'd throw it back. And then after a while, you know, the body language between the trainees was sort of a bit like, what is he doing? Why does he keep throwing this pop at us? And then he throws it at one trainee teacher and says, right, open that if you will, please. And then, of course, they go, I don't think so. We've been throwing this around for 2 or 3 minutes. And he said, yeah, that's a student that's just walked into your class. And what you don't realize is that 20 things have happened to them that morning that you don't know about. And just because they're 60 seconds late for your class, you might make one comment about punctuality, but that could be the thing that tips somebody completely over the edge and makes something escalate exponentially. And he was making this whole point about a little bit of empathy, a little bit of understanding. We've all got our own journeys to where we get to work every day. But if we just had a little bit more compassion, maybe a bit more empathy, then we can often change the outcomes, I think. And you touched upon that straight away in your intro.
Yeah, 100%. We used to call it Max. We have a can of Pepsi Max as we throw it round and be like, Max has had this now. Max was late for the bus and Max was this. But I'd also extend that. I do a piece with practitioners on students who have English as an additional language. And I think, you know, if you think about that journey to a place of work or a place of education, how do you get the bus? How do you know what time the bus is coming? How do you talk to the driver when you get on the bus so that you're not seen as rude? How do you pay for your ticket? How do you pick up the newspaper and find somewhere to sit? And then how do you listen to the conversations around you when that's not your native language? And the stress,
100%.
pressure of that.
100%.
And we don't appreciate that in education as much as I think we should. I think we should. I'm a huge fan of, like, we talk a lot about accessibility and equity, but I'd also extend it to like Wi-Fi access and all that kind of stuff. Like, and I know you're big on this. And what we do is we set homework to be done outside the classroom. Sure, great. Have we checked whether they've got access to a device? Have we checked whether they've got internet access at home? You know, I live in a rural village where we have no public Wi-Fi. We have no Wi-Fi on buses. So the argument of they can do it on the bus doesn't work. If we did have Wi-Fi on buses, it wouldn't work. So we've got no mobile signal. So we have no mobile signal in lots of parts of where I live. How does the student access that work outside of the classroom? And when we think about being inclusive, we've got to build all of this in. It's not just they have this need, they have this need, they have this need. You could go on forever. What we need to do is design a process where everyone feels included. And the big thing for me would be like, what spaces do you create before or after your formal time settings for students to decompress from the journey on the way in, set themselves up from the journey on the way home, and have access to do the work that you need them to do? And I think we view it as it should be a before and after school club, and actually that's the wrong lens. What it should be is the building's open, come in, use it respectfully, have access to all the things you need to have access to. And if you want someone to talk to, we're here. But actually, if you just want to sit and decompress, you can also do that too. And we're seeing spaces sort of start to come onto that now. But very often it's the bell goes, lesson start, and away we go. And Max is already fizzing in that kind of pot. It's just going to escalate and escalate. So yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is thinking about how do we create the spaces for people to feel okay before they begin their journey.
Yeah, and design for everyone in that process. And I'm listening to you there, and I was mindful of all the other complexities as well. Like, I remember during the pandemic, one of the big things for me that became obvious very quickly was, even beyond devices and internet access and all of that, it was that I don't think everybody had really fully considered, do people even have appropriate spaces at home to even do that work in? And I'm thinking as much now about staff as I am about, say, students in education, because I know from firsthand experience of taking lots of teachers through a process of how you build online content and stuff, that if you haven't got all the right equipment, the right space, the perfect setting to do it all, it's very, very difficult to create that online learning content, even as a member of staff, never mind a student who might literally not have the appropriate space to learn in. And I think that's one thing that our schools and colleges and universities provide, is that space that's designed for that process. And if you think about it, that's quite important, actually. And yeah, it's maybe a topic for another time. But Chris, I'm going to let you hand over now. We've made it this far into a conversation in the 21st century without mentioning AI.
I know.
We're ready. We're ready.
We're going to go for it, Chris. Otherwise, people are going to be going.
Just thinking that.
What century was this recorded in?
Yeah. We mentioned the fax machine in the last one, Sam. Imagine
we did.
That's how far back we go.
Yeah. And we mentioned, by the way, just on the fax machine, Sammy, we mentioned it, and my comment was, who bought the first fax machine? Because at that point, you couldn't send a fax to anybody. Like, who bought the first one? What I really want to know is who sold it. Who
Yeah.
sold a device you couldn't use to somebody?
What visionary.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was just amazing. Yeah, this device, it's very expensive, but you can't use it yet.
Yeah.
Do you want it? Anyway, sorry, Chris.
No worries at all. Yeah, just on the space as well. That's something that I did working remotely, was get my own space. I'm fortunate enough to have a conservatory. I can work in that, but that is my office space rather than sitting on my knee in the living room with distractions and whatnot. It makes a massive difference to me. It allows me to focus and get on with the task in hand. So
Chris does have a very beautiful setting to work in. We should point out he lives in a converted chapel, which is stunning. And outside his windows at the back, there's just graves. Slightly suspiciously, he's always got fresh flowers around his desk. And there's a lot of concern about where those have come from, but we'll just move on from that. But yeah, but he does have a rather lovely place to work in. That is true.
As I've always said, that's for the courts to decide. So we'll leave that there. So okay, moving on. Okay, so AI, yeah, the elephant in the room, if you like. Everybody's got access. There's different versions: ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, you name it. So from your perspective, Sammy, what sort of excites you the most about AI? The opportunities, but also what sort of worries you as well? Are there any like, ooh, a bit like when the internet was launched and, oh, you know, all that information out there, it's a scary place. Your sort of positives and negatives on that from a teaching and learning perspective and for students?
Yeah, I think what excites me is that we will have, I personally already have faster workflows for things. Like I can go way faster at things. I've had to review a strategy document this morning. I don't want to read that. Like, I'll read it, but my thoughts about it will come as I'm reading it, and then I'll be distracted from my flow. So what I like to do is say, tell me what you think about this, and then I'll argue with it. And I use Gemini. I'll argue with Gemini. I'm like, yeah, but I think this. And Gemini's like, well, I think this. And I'm like, well, go through my drive and find me an example of something else where I've had this argument before. And so for me, that excites me, that joined up approach to learning. We're not going to see learning happening in isolation. It's going to be a joined up approach of skills. You know, look at Gemini already scanning my drive and knowing where everything is and knowing what's happening where. But let's not pretend we haven't had this technology for ages. It's just presented slightly differently now. We've had cloud search in Google for absolutely ages. Like forever, cloud search has gone, you need this document for this meeting at this time. Like for as long as I've known, we've had that ability. So we've got to be cautious with this because we're excited about it. But actually, we had a lot of this already. It's just because it's a bit faster and a bit newer that it's speeding things up a bit more. I strongly dislike the argument that AI will solve accessibility because it will personalize everything. That doesn't work for me because I think we still need to help people find what works for them. So that human that helps them work out what is the challenge that you're having. You know, diagnosis by social media is a realm that we're in at the moment. We're going to have diagnosis by AI soon. And, you know, we really do need to be thinking about actually, just because we can personalize things doesn't mean people will. Because just because we can put videos in the classroom, has every teacher put videos in the classroom? No. Just because we can use quizzing in the classroom, does every teacher end a lesson with a quiz? No. Just because we can record meetings and have online meetings, does that mean we don't do face-to-face meetings anymore? No, it's not binary. But I think AI and this solution that is this magic pill that because it can personalize education, it should and it would. I think that is the very dangerous element for me. Accessibility and inclusivity is so broad, as we've started to touch upon. It's got biases in it. And I've long held the view that AI is just a mirror to society. So all the awfulness that's in society is shown in AI. However, I heard a very interesting talk recently, and I'm forgetting the doctor's name, so I'll have to look it up. But a very impressive doctor from University of Durham, and she said that it's not that it's a mirror to the lenses of society. It's that when something happens, we only ever talk about the negative. So it's got more of the negative to talk about. And it's not that, you know, we hold all these awful views of people. It's that we talk about these awful views that other people have of people. You know, if you read the news today, there'll be an awful news article. Someone said something awful about someone, and then there'll be an article about how awful someone's been. And, you know, we're rightly outraged by that. But for a large language model, that's generating multiple occurrences of that. And so she said it's not necessarily that it's a mirror to society, it's a mirror to the fact that society only talks about negative things. So actually, there's an argument that we should all be super positive and super lovely. And, you know, we should, yes, rightly challenge all the things that we're outraged about, but always try and put a positive spin on things like where can you learn more and where can you do this? And eventually the language models will catch up. But what was really interesting to me is like my big worry was, gosh, my kids are going to grow up with all this awfulness of like generations of like how we treat people and how awful we are. And yes, they are. But what we need to do is say, actually, no, all this negativity exists, and all, you know, we did call people these names and these things did happen, but talked about it and we learned from it, and that's why you're hearing it more.